Hello there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike. It is Superfly Comics Guy, and welcome, finally, to the Omnibus collection tour I've been promising you guys for so long as a reward for hitting 1,000 subscribers. And speaking of, once again, thank you so much for that support. I was never really expecting that when I got into this, but it is so cool just to see how many of you like talking about this kind of stuff or even care slightly about what I have to say about these books. So here we finally are. I have no clue how long this video is going to be. I haven't really planned anything ahead. I'm sort of just winging it here, shooting from the hip, recording some stuff separately. It's going to get kind of chaotic here, but I will try to leave some helpful timestamps for you in the description, just in case you're only interested in certain characters or certain sections. But hey, this is a good time. If you do see a book in here that you really want me to read and review, feel free to point it out, because I do keep track of all the requests I receive, and eventually I do plan to get to them all. So as I said, if you see a book in here that I have that you want me to review, feel free to point it out. But yeah, for now, let's just relax. Grab your favorite snack, your favorite drink, sit back, and let's just enjoy talking about some books together. Okay, so here we finally are. Here it is. This is The Vault, my collection of comic books. No offense to Omnidog. Hopefully he won't get upset that I'm calling this The Vault. But hey, I picked that name long before I was aware of any YouTube channels or before I created my own. So no harm, no foul. I don't know. In case you're curious, these are the Billy bookcases from IKEA, just with the doors. I don't know. I figured the doors helped offer some extra protection from like dust and stuff, just in case. Probably a little bit overkill. Here you can see, got a couple disc plates up here, some metal posters. Got a cool one here of Spider-Man fighting Venom. It actually kind of looks like the suit that Tom Holland got at the end of No Way Home. And we got one here of Batman on top of a little statue here. Lee Bermejo's Batman. I think he does a really cool drawing of Batman. What else do I got up here? Here we have a Flippy. This is great if you don't have one of these so you don't have to worry about like reading an omnibus on your lap and potentially damaging it. You can just grab one of these, sit it on your lap, put the book on there, pick whatever side of the Flippy you want, and just enjoy a comfortable reading experience. This is really cool. It was recently my birthday, and a certain someone, a special someone, got me this super iconic framed image of Mark Bagley's Ultimate Spider-Man from issue 150 something. I can't remember which one, but it's when Mark Bagley returned to the series to sort of finish it off. Man, this is one of the covers they should have used for the Death of Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus. Just pops so much more. I love this one. Here you can see the book I'm currently slowly making my way through, Deadpool and Cable, one of the original printings. Kind of preparing myself for the Deadpool and Wolverine movie that's coming out shortly. And man, I wish they still had this cover for the new printings they made of this book. Like, this one is so much cooler. And oh boy, check this out. You're probably curious about this. As I mentioned, it was my birthday recently, and my brother's a bit of an arts and crafts nerd. So he spent, I don't know how many months secretly making this basically a replica of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man mask. It's so freaking cool. Look at the attention to detail. He painted the fabric himself. He made the lenses himself. He was like apparently cutting up like plastic bottles and stuff for the lenses and like puff paint for the raised webbing, and used like a mannequin mask underneath for the form. Oh, just so freaking cool. He's so talented. But anyway, we should probably get to the actual books, shouldn't we? I have these all organized in, well, alphabetical order, sort of. I have the Marvel section first and then the DC stuff later. It's kind of organized by character in alphabetical order, but then there are some sort of exceptions to that. It all started with Spider-Man, and then moved on to Batman, and then Daredevil. And then for all other characters or teams I have a mild interest in, it's just sort of like the greatest hits. Like, what's the greatest run from this character or this character? But I'll talk a little bit more as we get into each one. So why don't we start here with the Marvel section? All right, so A for Alias. I know it's called Jessica Jones Alias, but I think the original title was Alias, and the name of the series is Alias anyway. So it goes in the A section. Man, one of the earliest reviews I did, just such a good like crime noir investigation, thrillery, detective-y type stuff. Like, it's a mystery graphic novel whose biggest mystery is the protagonist. You have Jessica Jones, this investigator, private investigator who, she has powers, but you sort of don't know about them right away. She likes to keep them secret, and you find out more and more about her as the series goes on. It's really, really brilliantly written. It's one of the earliest things Brian Michael Bendis ever did for Marvel. Yeah, love that series. Can't recommend it enough. Then we have Annihilation, both Annihilation and Annihilation Conquest. A lot of people say this is Marvel's best event, like Marvel's cosmic saga, because you have Annihilation, Annihilation Conquest, Road to War of Kings, and then Realm of Kings, something like that. I struggle with like cosmic stuff a lot of the time, like latching onto it and finding it interesting. I prefer like grounded street level stuff. But everybody talked these up so much that I was like, all right, fine, I'll give them a shot. We'll see how it is. I know Nova plays a big part in this. The Guardians of the Galaxy are, I think, heavily involved. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a decent amount of inspiration here for the MCU Guardians of the Galaxy. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. And then we have the Avengers section, starting off here with Kurt Busiek and George Perez's run on Avengers from the 90s. Everyone says this is like about as close to classic Avengers as you can get without actually going all the way back to like the Silver Age, one of their most definitive runs. I don't know yet if I'll pick up Volume 2. We'll see. I did pick up Volume 1 because, with all the praise, I figure I should try it out. I am a little bit nervous about maybe how dated and wordy it might be, but hey, we'll see. And then we have my personal favorite run on Avengers that I've read so far, which, again, I haven't read that much Avengers to be fair, but New Avengers by Brian Michael Bendis, Volume 1. Oh, I loved this book. Just felt like a freaking blockbuster. Really shook up the team, brought in some never-before-seen members onto the Avengers, like Spider-Man and Wolverine. It was their first time on the Avengers, at least I think. Some really great artwork by David Finch. Oh, so cool. And then you have the follow-up. For all intents and purposes, the follow-up, Secret Invasion. This is basically a New Avengers Omnibus Volume 2, but I really liked the story in here, but the way this omnibus was mapped, it didn't really do the pacing a lot of favors. It was kind of all over the place, so that kind of irked me about this omnibus. And then we have the Hickvengers. It's such a strange name every time I hear that. But yeah, Avengers by Jonathan Hickman. This is more recent, mid-2010s, I think. We have the lovely misaligned spines that they did for the new printings of these omnibuses. Haven't gotten around to these books yet. I really, really should. Everybody says it's really good. A lot of people like it more than Bendis' run too. And then it all kind of culminates in Secret Wars, which I have there in between. And then I have the Ultimates as well, because that's technically still Avengers. It's just the Ultimate Universe version of the Avengers. So I'm interested in trying that out too, because big fan of Ultimate Spider-Man, as a lot of you guys probably know. And then we have Black Cat by Jed MacKay, the big up-and-comer at Marvel, hotshot writer, because I think Black Cat was one of the first series he did for Marvel, and that got critical acclaim. And then I think he moved on to Moon Knight, which everybody was praising that run as well. And then I think, isn't he writing like Avengers currently now, Jed MacKay? Or Is that Jason Aaron, or was that before? I don't know. I'm not really up to date with my modern Avengers comics, or really modern comics in general. But then we have Black Panther by Christopher Priest. So I am pretty interested in Black Panther. I think he's a cool character. He's got that, royalty, that angle that not a lot of superheroes would have. This is by Christopher Priest. Everybody says that, well, not everybody, but a lot of people view this as Black Panther's best run. Introduces a lot of commonly known elements today, like the Dora Milaje. Fleshes out the political side more, I think. And then down here, we have Ed Brubaker's Captain America run. All 5 omnibuses of this. So I've made it up to Trial of Captain America. I haven't read Return of the Winter Soldier yet, but let me know if you guys want to see that. I don't feel like that many people were interested in the Captain America reviews, but if I'm wrong, let me know, and I can read and review Return of the Winter Soldier too. Definitely got to say the highlight of this run is the first 3 volumes. Captain America, Death of Captain America, and Captain America Lives. Man, freaking turns Captain America into like an action hero. It's got so much like political intrigue and super spy stuff. This was heavy inspiration for Captain America the Winter Soldier and Captain America Civil War, the MCU movies, and I love those movies, especially Winter Soldier. That's my favorite MCU movie. It took a spy thriller and then put superhero characters in it, and it asked, like, what happens to a character like Captain America who's, so headstrong in his values? What happens to Captain America when America changes and he has to adapt? I found that such an interesting angle. And then we have my third favorite character, Daredevil. This is a pretty chonky section here, starting off with Frank Miller. Daredevil by Frank Miller, both the main omnibus and the companion omnibus, with a funky spine design. It's the only omnibus that has this spine design with like the omnibus logo at the bottom. But apparently that's how Frank Miller wanted it, or so I understand. Anyway, this is really where the character Daredevil, as we know him today, was born. Like, yeah, he started off in, was it 1964? 1963? I don't know, the 60s. But he never really came into his own until Frank Miller got his hands on him in the 80s. Because everybody kind of accused Daredevil of being like a knockoff, swashbuckling Spider-Man before then. But here, like, Frank Miller introduced so many iconic elements about Daredevil. He made it darker. He introduced Stick and the Hand and Elektra and all these elements about Daredevil that are such common plot threads now. Frank Miller did first, and the companion omnibus is arguably even better because you have iconic stories like Daredevil Born Again and Daredevil the Man Without Fear. Such good stories. And the companion recently got reprinted, so if you haven't read this stuff before, gotta say, I strongly recommend it. And then we have the 90s series, the Marvel Knights Daredevil by Joe Quesada and Kevin Smith and David Mack and some other people. And this one was okay. This is an okay omnibus. Wasn't a massive fan of it, but it does contain some important stories like Guardian Devil. That's probably the most important story to Daredevil's overall plot, I guess you could say, or character development. And Parts of a Whole I really liked too. I didn't really like the other story that's in here, Daredevil Father. I thought that was kind of wacky, and the art can get kind of wacky as well in this omnibus. But then we have my favorite Daredevil run, the Daredevil by Brian Michael Bendis omnibuses volumes 1 and 2. Holy freaking crap, man. Coming from the Netflix series, this will feel exactly like that. Well, again, I keep calling it the Netflix series because that's where that show started, but now it's on Disney+. Anyway, Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev, they did such a good job on this run. Super duper dark. It's such good character development. The relationships between Matt's companions and supporting cast. Again, not afraid to get dark. So many good moments with Kingpin and Bullseye, and this really brilliant character they introduce in here known as Mila, who's like a interesting, like a new romantic interest for Matt. I love this run. One of the earliest videos I did, and I probably didn't do a very good job in that review because the audio was probably terrible and I didn't really plan what I was going to talk about. Anyway, maybe I'll revisit those books at some point in the future in another video. But then we have the follow-up, Daredevil by Ed Brubaker, another Ed Brubaker omnibus on here already. And this follows up directly after the Bendis run, which takes... I can't spoil how the Bendis run ends, but it is super duper unique. And Brubaker's run, I would say, is generally regarded as one of the darkest points in Daredevil's history. Like, the Bendis run is dark, but then Brubaker's like, no, I'm going to raise you, and he goes even darker. Some people don't like that. Again, I kind of like that. I'm a sucker for Daredevil's endless adversity that he has to push through all the time, and all the religious angles he has to struggle with. He's such an interesting, compelling character. But then we have the polar opposite, which is Mark Waid's run. Oh yeah, I should probably mention, I completely skipped. The Daredevil Shadowland omnibus would technically go between Brubaker and Mark Waid. I skipped it. I generally get the gist of the story, and people say the Shadowland omnibus is just not very good, so I was fine with skipping it. But yeah, Mark Waid, Daredevil by Mark Waid, the polar opposite to Ed Brubaker's run. Mark Waid said it himself, he's not that good at writing depressing characters. He's kind of he likes writing more upbeat characters and kind of lighthearted, giving a lighthearted vibe. And that's kind of what he does here. He sort of throws back to the classic Silver Age depictions of Daredevil, where he's more swashbuckly, he's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and it's a really interesting new perspective. But he's also not afraid to revisit the dark moments, and that contrast makes it work so much better. When you have happy moments, it makes the darker moments hit that much harder. And that's as far as I've gotten with my Daredevil reading, because the next omnibus in order would be the Daredevil by Charles Soule omnibus, and that's the mid-2010s, 2016 years of Daredevil. What was it called? The Marvel Now era or something like that? I don't know. Marvel has such stupid names for all of these eras. But yeah, looking forward to reading that next. Mainly because that means I can jump straight into the Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky omnibus, which is coming out soon, and everybody has praised that so much, and I'm generally a fan of what I've read from Chip Zdarsky so far. So that should be pretty fun. Okay, and then we have the Deadpool section. Deadpool by Joe Kelly. Yeah, I picked this up because everybody says this is Deadpool's best omnibus. And I can definitely see how it would be the most influential. I struggled with it, I'll be honest, reading through the Deadpool by Joe Kelly omnibus, because I can see how it defined the character, but revisiting it all these years later and looking back now as a new reader, it just didn't really work for me. And I wasn't a fan of the art by Ed McGuinness a lot of the time. I wasn't a fan of all the supporting cast and these weird... I've already forgotten what the name of the weird corporation is in this series that Deadpool's working with, but it just didn't really click for me. And speaking of books that unfortunately didn't click that much for me, we have Fantastic Four by Jonathan Hickman. Now, I'm probably going to catch a lot of flack for this, but I couldn't really get that into these books. Objectively, they're pretty good. They're well written, but I think it's just the Fantastic Four in general that I'm not that big of a fan of. I was never drawn towards them. I never found them too interesting. I get that they're super significant. They're Marvel's first family. They're kind of where Marvel started back in the 60s. But I don't know, maybe for me these books were a little overhyped, but there definitely are some really impactful emotional moments in here involving the team, because again, they have that family dynamic. You can sense that those years of history between them. And there's actually some really great moments with Spider-Man in here too. So, you know, I'm always a sucker for that. And okay, moving on to the final row of this first bookshelf here. Man, we're going to be here for a while, aren't we? We have Ghost Rider by Jason Aaron. Hell yeah, man. I loved this book. Ghost Rider, like, come on. How can you not think he's just the coolest character ever? Because, like, look at him. He's a flaming skull guy on a flaming motorcycle. He's got hellfire powers and a penance stare, and he goes up against demons and all this crazy stuff. What a cool freaking idea for a character. And this, Jason Aaron did a really good job with this. This is just a blockbuster, turn your brain off, no, like balls to the walls adventure type of thing. And then next we have the Hulk section, which is pretty short. Again, I was never really that into Hulk. I think he's, you know, he there's lots of opportunity for like compelling stories because you have that duality, that sort of Jekyll and Hyde between Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk. Planet Hulk, I really, really enjoyed. This was a great story. Lots of inspiration from this book was used in Thor Ragnarok. And it really delves into the themes of found family and, you know, finding your sense of belonging and delving into like, what is Hulk's purpose? Where does he really fit? And, you know, this book was so good that it, you know, it's the reason why the next book is there. Immortal Hulk. I think the biggest Marvel omnibus. It's freaking huge. 1,600 and something pages. Or maybe Avengers vs. X-Men is slightly bigger. I don't know. It's big. Oh yeah, and I still need to read the World War Hulk trade as well. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Immortal Hulk. Everybody says this is the Hulk's best run in terms of modern Hulk anyway. Came out in the late 2010s, maybe 2020 even. I don't know. Written by Al Ewing. And yeah, it brings in a lot of like horror aspects into the Hulk, like revisiting the whole sort of Frankenstein's monster thing and body horror and stuff like that. So I'm intrigued. There's a lot of praise behind the book, so I figured it deserved a look. And then we have the Immortal Iron Fist. Yeah, again, Ed Brubaker. This is the main reason I jumped to this. I think Iron Fist, I mean, he's not one of the first characters I think of, but I like Ed Brubaker. And the whole martial arts side, I think, is pretty cool. There's a lot of cool opportunity, I think, for Iron Fist stories. So I'm curious to see how the stories in here will shape up to be. Yeah, we'll see. And then Moon Knight. Before I got into this hobby, I wasn't really that into Moon Knight. But then I really, really enjoyed the Moon Knight Disney Plus show with Oscar Isaac. I thought he did a really good job in that show. And then I wanted to find out more about the character. So I started looking up, well, what's Moon Knight's, what are his best runs? Where should you start? And basically everybody was like, yeah, no, just start from the beginning. Start from his series in the 80s. So that's where these volume 1 and 2 of Moon Knight come from. That's his Bronze Age appearances. It starts off in, what magazine did he first appear in? Werewolf by Night, it was his first appearance, and then he moved on to some issues of Hulk magazine, and then eventually in 1980 he got his own solo series, and that's when it really kicks into, that's when he really sort of starts to come into his own, especially in volume 2. A lot of people give him crap for being like, oh, he's a ripoff of Batman, but yes, they have like gadgets, and you could say their costumes are kind of similar with the cape and everything, and the whole vengeance thing, but I think that one of the biggest things that distinguishes Moon Knight from Batman is that Moon Knight, first of all, he's got the dissociative identity disorder, so he has these personalities in his head that he's constantly kind of warring with. He has, Stephen Grant and Mark Spector and Jake Lockley, and then, the persona of Moon Knight as well. And then recently, I think you have Mr. Knight as well, but I haven't read that run yet. And these personalities are always kind of fighting for control of the body. But also, Moon Knight, he is a borderline addiction to violence. He's constantly seeking out a fight and just takes punishment for the sake of taking punishment and just beating on people. And that gets especially more fleshed out in the next omnibus, the Houston, Benson, and Hurwitz Moon Knight omnibus, containing his mid-2000s run. I skipped over the 90s Mark Spector Moon Knight series because, I don't know, a lot of people say it's just not worth it. It's not that good. So I was fine with jumping to the 2000s, especially, again, some amazing art by David Finch in here. But yeah, it really delves into Moon Knight's violent side and how that becomes a problem. That really comes to a head in this omnibus. And speaking of violence, here we have the Punisher Max omnibuses by Garth Ennis. Again, widely regarded by a lot of people to be Punisher's best run. Super duper violent, like unapologetically violent, and I guess, what's the word? I don't know, I can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but it's, just lots of violence and coarse language and mature themes. I did read Volume 1 recently. I haven't gotten around to Volume 2. Generally enjoyed Volume 1, even if it can be a little bit over the top at times with, I don't know, because a lot of characters just start to kind of sound the same, cursing at each other, and like a lot of the villains are pretty interchangeable. They're all either drug dealers or rapists or racists or just bigots. I don't know, they kind of blend together, but I don't know, the stories were still pretty cool. Then we have the Sensational She-Hulk. This was kind of just, I don't know, I wanted like a fun book. I thought her Disney Plus show was fine. Like, I don't think it deserves as much hate as it got. It wasn't great. But everybody said, look, John Byrne's Sensational She-Hulk series from the 80s was just super innovative for the time, because she started doing the fourth wall breaking long before Deadpool even existed. Lots of good humor, interesting stories in here. So at some point, I really should delve into this book and, for my own opinion of it. I'm intrigued. Next up, we have Silver Surfer. Now, this is an interesting one. I wasn't planning on picking this up, but again, a lot of people put this book as one of their top 5 omnibuses of all time, like their favorite omnibuses. And I'm just like, really? Silver Surfer? Huh. Okay. As I said before, I do kind of struggle latching on to like super big cosmic stories. But, everybody says this has kind of got like a Doctor Who vibe to it. And, my girlfriend's been she's a big Doctor Who fan, and she's been trying to get me more into that show. So we've been going through some episodes, and from what I understand, yeah, I can see the Doctor Who vibes, because it's like Silver Surfer has like a companion in this that he travels the universe with and shows her all these different like planets and people and cultures and, information basically. So it's kind of like a space exploration story, I think. I don't know. We'll see. And then, oh yeah, it's finally time. We have reached the Spider-Man section, ladies and gentlemen. The point where my omnibus collecting hobby all started from was Spider-Man. Because my initial goal was, I want to collect, because he's my favorite character, I want to collect all of, or as much of Amazing Spider-Man, the main Spider-Man series, in omnibus format as I can, from his origin all the way up to the modern day, up to a point. I don't know if I'll continue into the current series, but yeah, I wanted to have like a chronological history of Spider-Man. So here we have, we have Untold Tales of Spider-Man, which is, I haven't reviewed yet, but it's really, really good. It's like a companion piece to the original Silver Age stories from the 60s, but it was written in the 90s as like a sort of flashback series. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but the Untold Tales of Spider-Man omnibus basically goes hand in hand with Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1 by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. I mean, God, speaking of, what more is there to say? The Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1, my very first omnibus. So freaking good. Yes, it's aged, don't get me wrong, but there's so much of Spider-Man's character and supporting characters and villains in here that are just, they were present since the beginning. Like Stan Lee and Steve Ditko were on a roll. Characters like, Spider-Man and Peter Parker, of course, but then, J. Jonah Jameson is immediately iconic. And then villains like Dr. Octopus and the Green Goblin and Electro and Sandman. And was Mysterio in here? I can't remember. Maybe, probably. But so many iconic characters. And then continued right through into Volume 2, where John Romita came in as artist. And, the stories definitely got their foundation in Volume 1. But then Volume 2 here, when John Romita comes in, this is where the book becomes, like, beautiful. This is where that kind of classic Spider-Man art sort of comes from. Because I swear, the influence John Romita had on the comic industry and so many books after this you can't overstate how much of an impact he had. It's crazy. Because for the longest time this became like the art style that subsequent artists would try to follow for Amazing Spider-Man. And then you have Volume 3 wrapping up Stan Lee's initial run on the series, but then new artists start to come in like Gil Kane as well. And then, some pretty good stories in there. It does end with the the 6-armed Spider-Man story, but we don't have to talk about that. But then, moving straight on into Volume 4. By this point, I think we're getting into the early 70s. This is where, Stan Lee leaves the book, and you have some new blood, some new writers on the book, namely Jerry Conway. I think he was 19 years old when he got this writing role for Amazing Spider-Man, which is crazy to me. And this has a lot of iconic stories too. You have, the biggest story in here would definitely be I don't want to spoil it, but the original story of Gwen Stacy, shall we say? I mean, the cover kind of spoils it, but whatever. Punisher and Jackal appear, which, has a lot of repercussions later on in Spider-Man history. And then we have Volume 5 as well. I haven't done a review on Volume 5. Let me know if you want me to do that. But it's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's as good as the other volumes. A lot of side stories in here, but the big one is the original Clone Saga in Volume 5, again, which has a lot of repercussions later on in Spider-Man history. And then we do a bit of a time skip because we don't have a Volume 6 of Amazing Spider-Man yet, unfortunately. So we jump to 1980 with Roger Stern's Spider-Man. It's just called Spider-Man because this collects his Spectacular Spider-Man run, but also his Amazing Spider-Man run. And similarly to how the 90s Kurt Busiek Avengers and George Perez Avengers were like as classic as you can get without going back to the Silver Age, this is kind of that for Spider-Man, because this is Bronze Age Spider-Man, but it still has that classic feel. There's so many good stories in here. Roger Stern really has a good grasp on the duality of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And you got really great stories in here, like there's a really good Juggernaut story. The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man is probably the most well-known story from here. Is this where Black Cat appears for the first time? Or maybe a little bit before that is when she first appears. I can't remember. And then, because Roger Stern's Spider-Man ends kind of neatly right before Secret Wars, this is where I have the Secret Wars Omnibus, because Spider-Man leaves for a bit and does that event before coming back. And then we got another time skip here. We jump to the late 80s and the cusp of the 90s with David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man. Holy crap. Do I love Todd McFarlane's art on Spider-Man. It's so unique, but it really shook it up in a way the series sorely needed at the time, because generally the art in the Spider-Man book was still sort of stuck in that John Romita era. And don't get me wrong, like I love John Romita's like art. But for the longest time, just artists after that were just sticking to that formula and not really branching out and changing. And other books by this time had kind of started to move on and started to experiment with new art styles. Like Moon Knight was getting more experimental, and Frank Miller's Daredevil was getting pretty like dark and dramatic. And then what else? Like The Question had some pretty interesting art from what I've seen. Frank Miller's work on Batman as well. Like books, the artwork in these comic books was starting to move on, and Spider-Man was stuck until Todd McFarlane came along and really shook things up, added so much like dynamism to the panels and the poses. Like he really just, his philosophy was like, I just want to make it look cooler. And yeah, that's exactly what happened. Todd McFarlane definitely took off, because after that, Marvel gave him his own series, Adjectiveless Spider-Man. And I mean, where he was able to, write and draw on the book. But this omnibus, let's face it, you're here for the art. The stories in here are fine, and that's probably being nice to them. But the art in the Adjectiveless Spider-Man omnibus is the selling point. And honestly, you can see a lot of the early seeds of Spawn artwork in this omnibus too, Spider-Man by Todd McFarlane. That's really, really cool to see from like a historical point of view. And then you have Spider-Man by David Michelinie and Eric Larson. Eric Larson picked up the art for Todd McFarlane after McFarlane left the Amazing Spider-Man series. This omnibus was all right. I don't think I liked the art as much as I did the Todd McFarlane omnibus, but it does have a lot of cool Venom stories in there. Yeah, that's the other thing I didn't mention. Like Michelinie and McFarlane co-created Venom. And think about how cool and popular of a character he is now. That's crazy. But yeah, Eric Larson expanded on Venom a lot, added a lot of distinctive elements like the super long tongue and like the crazy teeth and like mouth slime that he often has. And then we continue the Venom theme into Spider-Man versus Venom. And this is kind of a mishmash. It's technically like a Venom Omnibus Volume 0, as some people have put it, but I put it here because it's like a nice segue between the Eric Larson Omnibus and like the Clone Saga. Although I will have to make space for the Michelinie and Bagley Omnibus coming up soon. But yeah, the Spider-Man vs. Venom omnibus is kind of like a highlight reel of Venom's greatest hits from a few of these omnibuses. So it double dips a little bit with the McFarlane omnibus, a little bit with the Eric Larson omnibus. It double dips with the upcoming Michelinie and Bagley omnibus, but you also get the Maximum Carnage story in here. And that's super duper cool. You get the first appearance of Carnage in here, so that's cool to see. I love Carnage, freaking terrifying villain. And then we have, oh boy, the Clone Saga omnibuses. What more can I say? I mean, if you really want to hear my thoughts on these books, I've done reviews on all 4 of them. Clone Saga 1 and 2, as well as Ben Reilly 1 and 2. One of the most controversial eras in Spider-Man's entire history for reasons that I really don't have the time to go into right now. Okay, maybe I'm being a little harsh. Volume 1 of the Clone Saga is not that bad. There's some good stories in there. There's some good ideas in there. But then they start to get sidetracked real quickly. Clone Saga Volume 2, it's a miracle I still have hair on my head. Let's just say that. There are some infuriating moments in there. Ben Reilly Volume 1 wasn't too bad. It was kind of mediocre. I did enjoy seeing Ben Reilly in the role of Spider-Man, and I love his costumes, both the hoodie and the new sensational Spider-Man costume that he has. And then Ben Reilly Volume 2 just kind of gets ridiculous again with how they explain certain plot elements and all this stuff. So, I don't know, it was a rough period, but what was really pushing me through to get through those Clone Saga omnibuses was these 2 guys right here. The Amazing Spider-Man by J. Michael Straczynski, covering the 2000s, the early 2000s into the late 2000s period of Spider-Man. And man, This is some freaking gold, especially Volume 1. Holy crap. I did a really, really long review of Volume 1 because I loved it so freaking much. I found that it was such a nice return to form after suffering through the Clone Saga omnibuses. JMS just understands the character of Spider-Man so well. The conflict between Peter Parker and Spider-Man, how you get some of the best stories when those two worlds collide, when Peter Parker's obligations collide with his responsibilities as Spider-Man, and you really get the sense of that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man in here, because Peter Parker is a little bit more mature here. He's working as a teacher, so you have that sort of mentorship aspect, that role model aspect to him outside of the suit as well, which is really cool. But then in the suit as well, he's, you see him connect with his neighborhood and the civilians, and he's trying to help them out. And, it asks interesting questions like, the villains are a lot more complex, like quote unquote villains, because it asks the questions of like, what happens to the families of these criminals when Spider-Man puts them away? Because some of them aren't necessarily bad people. They're just put into bad circumstances and they're trying to do the best they can with what they've got. Some really high stakes fights and moments in those omnibuses too. First appearance of Morlun, which, man, super cool. Ezekiel as well. So you get a lot of like mystical elements in this Spider-Man run, which a lot of people are not a fan of. But I tend to sort of view it as like a hypothetical situation, like an alternate explanation of like Spider-Man's lore, or how a different perspective, if you will. Not necessarily the golden truth, if you will. And that's about as far as I've gotten in my modern Spider-Man reading. That's the latest I'm up to, because next we have Superior Spider-Man, which is definitely an interesting concept. When I first heard about it, it put me off when this run was first coming out, because it's basically somebody else takes over the body of Spider-Man, but their mind is intact. So like it's somebody else's mind controlling Spider-Man's body. And that's, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I haven't read it yet. People say it's really good. We'll see. And then we have the Spider-Verse Spider-Geddon omnibus. This feels like this concept has kind of really taken off since then. Everything has to be a multiverse and connected universe nowadays. Spider-Verse is getting super popular, especially with the movies too. My first experience with anything Spider-Verse related was actually the Shattered Dimensions video game. Yes, I'm a pretty big gamer, so if you have any questions about that, you can ask me about that. Been playing games since I was a kid. Then we have the Nick Spencer Spider-Man run, Volume 1. We have Volume 2 coming out here shortly. I don't know, people said they weren't a huge fan of this when it was coming out, but I feel like ever since the latest Spider-Man run has been coming out, I feel like people don't hate this as much. Then again, I feel like that's always how it goes with these books. It's always popular to hate the latest thing, but never the things that came before. And then the final little bit after that is Spider-Man Beyond. So this comes after Volume 2 of Nick Spencer's run. I don't think people were kind of mixed on this as well. I haven't seen the best reviews on it, but I figured it might be a good point to stop my Amazing Spider-Man collecting. Stop right there and, we'll see if I get pulled back in at any other point, but I feel like that's a good potential stopping point. Next we have the Chip Zdarsky Spider-Man Omnibus. Oh yeah, which I'm super excited about. So many good stories in here. I haven't read the Spectacular Spider-Man run of Chip Zdarsky's, but I have read Life Story and, what's the other one? Spider's Shadow. Really loved those. But next we have my favorite Spider-Man run, and probably my favorite omnibus, Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1. This was the series, I've said it so many times, this is the series that's got me into comics. I first started reading the Ultimate Spider-Man collections in 2017, I believe. And when the reprints of the first omnibus came out, I had to dive into it, of course. And then I've been collecting the later volumes as well. Again, Brian Michael Bendis, man. I know a lot of people, he's not super popular with people as of his most recent works, which I haven't read. But man, in the early 2000s, you can't deny this guy was firing on all cylinders, like Ultimate Spider-Man and Daredevil and New Avengers and Alias, Jessica Jones, like so many good series just this dude was pumping out. And Ultimate Spider-Man is no exception. Like this reimagines, I guess, the origins of Spider-Man, but for a modern audience. Because this came out in the 2000s when Marvel said to themselves, look, we can't really expect people to dive into 40 years of Spider-Man comics if they want to get more familiar with the character. So let's kind of reimagine him for a modern audience, and that's where Bendis and Bagley came in. This focuses on a younger Spider-Man. It's set in an alternate universe, and it reimagines and kind of simplifies a lot of his lore, but also expanding on it. It focuses a lot more on the high school years, which the original series didn't really do. People have this obsession of like thinking Spider-Man has to be like stuck in high school all the time, when really, if you look at the comics, he was only in there for a short while before he moved on to university pretty shortly after, and then got into like teaching and all this other stuff. But yeah, definitely love Ultimate Spider-Man, and looking forward to having Volume 4 to complete the initial run there when that comes out. And then we have the next big step for Ultimate Spider-Man from Brian Michael Bendis, Miles Morales, the big new character to come from this universe, I would say, because, you know, there's a status quo shift in Spider-Man, and Miles Morales takes up the mantle of Spider-Man, and he's been, you know, skyrocketing in popularity ever since his creation, which is really cool to see. I haven't read the next volume, the Spider-Man Miles Morales volume, because that's when he goes over to the main Marvel universe. So he's no longer in the Ultimate Universe. He moves over to the main universe. People have said that material isn't as strong, but we'll see when I get to it. I might wait until I read Avengers by Hickman and Secret Wars before I get to Spider-Man Miles Morales, because he plays a part in the Secret Wars, and considering that it delves into the whole ending of that universe, I think it makes sense to read that after Secret Wars. Then we have the Spider-Gwen section. Well, this whole section is kind of like alternate Spider-Man stuff. So here we have Spider-Gwen. I was, curious about her character because I really thought she was well done in the Spider-Verse movies. But I gotta be honest, I wasn't really that big a fan of the first Omnibus. Like, it was okay. The art, a lot of the time, really held me back, I think, from fully enjoying it. The stories were pretty interesting. There were some interesting ideas in there. It's an alternate universe again. It's like Earth 65, I think. So they do some interesting twists on established characters, but I don't know. It took me a long time to get through. But I enjoyed it enough to give her a second chance. So that's why I picked up the Spider-Gwen Ghost Spider Omnibus. That's her second series. More recent, it's late 2010s, maybe early 2020s. So we'll see. It's got a really cool cover, which is a big reason for why I picked it up. But we'll see how it goes. And then we have Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't gotten around to reading Volume 1 yet. I'm super excited to, but man, it just feels like there's so much to read and not enough time. Am I right? But this series was coming out in the 90s. It focuses on a different Spider-Man, a Spider-Man from the future, from the year 2099, named Miguel O'Hara, so it's not Peter Parker, in Nueva York. So haha, very clever, yes. But yeah, written by Peter David. Both of these volumes are, in fact, who's, super talented writer, of course. A lot of people have a lot of praise for this series, so I am curious to check it out. I just need to find the time. Isn't that how it always goes? But then we have our next character, Thor. Now, I struggle a lot with Thor as well. I find him pretty boring. I'm not into the whole, Shakespearean speaking Thor. Norse mythology is super cool. I will give it that. But I don't know. For whatever reason, I just find him to be a boring character a lot of the time. But everybody says that Jason Aaron's Thor is the best run on Thor. A lot of inspiration for well, Thor Ragnarok and Love and Thunder as well. But Love and Thunder was not a good movie. But I'll say Volume 1, even though I'm not a big fan of Thor, and I struggle to read him a lot of the time, Volume 1 was pretty good, from my perspective. The God Butcher arc with Gore was super duper good, amazing villain. The new Thor that appears in this series I found super interesting. The artwork by Russell Dodderman when he jumps on the book I thought was amazing. I loved looking at that. Volume 2 I recently picked up. I wanted to wait for it to go on sale though because I was just kind of lukewarm on Volume 1. And then eventually it did, so that's how it made its way into my collection. So it's not high up on my reading list, but I'll get to it eventually and we'll see what I think. And then we have, oh boy, we have the Venomnibus section. And what can I say? The first 3 volumes of Venom, I just got because, Venom's a cool character. I'm a big Spider-Man fan. Well, that's an understatement. Spider-Man's my favorite character. But the stories in volumes 1, 2, and 3, I don't think I've seen anybody say that these omnibuses are good. This is really just from a collection perspective. I'll get to them eventually at some point. It'll probably involve copious amounts of alcohol. But we'll see. What I will say, though, Venom by Donny Cates, that is a banger of an omnibus. That is so good. Because Venom by Donny Cates was oh God, what year did it come out? 2018? So freaking good. It's Eddie Brock in the symbiote suit again. It really fleshes out the character of Eddie Brock. There's this new villain known as the King in Black. The god of the symbiotes, Null, is coming to wreak havoc. Venom's got to do something about it. He's at the middle of it all. It really turns into an action blockbuster. The pacing is just breakneck all the time. It barely gives you a chance to breathe. There's this really interesting new character named Dylan who comes into the picture. This story does so much right, and the art by Ryan Stegman is freaking amazing, spectacular. Highly, highly recommend the Venom by Donny Cates omnibus. Not the other Venomnibuses, the Venom by Donny Cates omnibus. Don't mix up my words there. Next up, we have Wolverine, who, again, I'm really interested in the character. Well, I haven't read his books, but, I like him in the movies and the video games I've played of him and some shows and stuff. But so I figured, since I've never read his comics before, I figure I should give him a try, right? I just haven't found the time yet. But, I decided to pick up the 3 volumes of Wolverine. I'm really not that interested in going beyond that. I'm not that passionate about the character. I think the first 3 volumes are probably sufficient. And then we have a kind of cheeky spin-off omnibus here. All new Wolverine from the all-new, all-different Marvel era. Again, Marvel has such weird names for these eras. They were going through their quirky phase, I suppose. This is a different Wolverine under the cowl. This is Laura Kinney, I believe her name is. So we have a different Wolverine. It's not Logan. So, some interesting shakeups there. It's written by Tom Taylor, who was a great writer, so that bodes well already. And then we have the X-Men section. This is the part where I say I am a little embarrassed that I haven't really read much X-Men at all, and especially not these Uncanny X-Men stories, because this is written by Chris Claremont, these 3 volumes that I have here. And everybody says this is where the X-Men really came into their own. Chris Claremont revolutionized this team because the X-Men started off in the 60s, but they got canceled because nobody was buying the book. It wasn't doing very well. It got canceled. And then in the 80s, they brought it back and they put Chris Claremont on the book. And then he turned them into the superstar team they are today. So given that significance of a legacy, I figured I should at least give the first 3 volumes a try, because they're on volume 5 now. And again, I'm not a huge X head. I don't plan on getting the rest unless these books blow my mind and I'm frothing at the mouth for more. But I figure I should start slow, try out these Uncanny X-Men books and see how I feel about it. I've watched the first 2 episodes of X-Men 97 on Disney Plus, so I need to continue those. I have been enjoying that show. That's really intriguing me. Again, just need to find the time for these things. All right, moving on to the next shelf, though. We continue with the X-Men section, but this is a little more modern. This is the Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon and John Cassaday. Yes, the same Joss Whedon of the Avengers MCU movies. Well, the first 2 anyway, Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron. And this is a very movie-like depiction of the X-Men. It kind of brings them back. Well, this is right after the Grant Morrison era, the new X-Men era, which kind of got a little funky. I haven't read that, and I don't really plan to. Everybody says this is a good modern jumping on point for the X-Men, so that's where I wanted to try it out. I thought it was all right. It didn't blow my mind like, some of the reviews and praise had led me to expect that it might, but it's pretty good. You have some interesting arcs in here, like involving... there's a pretty funny arc involving like the Danger Room and stuff, and Emma Frost becomes a big part of the X-Men, and Kitty Pryde gets a lot of development. I kind of lost interest when they started going into like some other worlds and stuff, like the Break world. I think it's been a while. I may have to revisit this book after I read like some of the Uncanny X-Men material, like Chris Claremont stuff. Maybe I'll appreciate it more. But as of right now, I just thought it was all right. Uncanny X-Force is one that I'm really looking forward to trying. Again, super excited. I was super excited when I got it, but for some reason I just haven't had the time to dive into it. But now I'm also wondering, like, maybe I should like read Uncanny X-Men first and then read Uncanny X-Force. I don't know. We'll see. And then we have the modern, even more modern X-Men era. The kind of Jonathan Hickman era of X-Men. I just wanted to pick a few books from this era just to sort of see how I would feel about it. Because that's the kind of idea. I'm sampling like a few eras of X-Men to kind of determine if they are for me or if they're not for me. So I have like the early stuff with Chris Claremont. I have some more modern stuff with the Joss Whedon and Uncanny X-Force Omnis. And then I have super duper recent, the Jonathan Hickman era with House of X and his X-Men series and X of Swords and Hellfire Gala and Inferno. So we'll see. If for some reason I still don't like X-Men after that, then that's a pretty good sign. I should stop with the X books. Then we have another book I'm embarrassed I haven't gotten to yet. The Colors Omnibus. Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's Yellow, Blue, Gray, and White Omnibus. Collecting the stories Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, Hulk Gray, and Captain America White. Short stories focused on each of those heroes that kind of delve into a specific era from that character's history. And Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, I loved their work on the Batman The Long Halloween books, like Dark Victory and Haunted Night as well. Oh, Tim Sale's artwork is just immaculate. I love it. Rest in peace. We lost him too soon. So at some point I should really dive into this omnibus because I don't imagine it would take me that long to get through. I'm really looking forward to Spider-Man Blue the most out of all of them, but I hear Daredevil Yellow is very good too. And then we have the aforementioned Spider-Man Life Story, which is now collected in the Chip Zdarsky omnibus I mentioned before. Super duper good story. I mean, for any fan of Spider-Man, I would say this is a must-read if you're generally familiar with Spider-Man's history and stories over the years from each of the decades, because this is a 6-issue story, and each issue focuses on a decade from Spider-Man's history, but it ages Spider-Man appropriately in real time. So he's 15, he's a teenager in the 60s, and then he's in his 20s in the 70s, and then his 30s in the 80s, and all those stories from those respective decades are happening in this book, just in a more condensed format. And it's such a genius idea, and I definitely recommend it to any Spidey fans watching this. And then we have kind of a quirky one, Spider-Man The Real Clone Saga, because after all the convoluted nonsense that happened in the 4 Clone Saga Omnis, I figured I'd check out this book, which is meant to be like a presentation of what the Clone Saga was actually supposed to be, like just a short little mini series before it blew up into the multi-year saga that it became. Again, not high on my reading list. It's got Clone Saga in the title, so that tells you all you need to know. But my curiosity got the better of me, so we'll see how that is, how that turns out when I get to it. Then we just got a whole bunch of board games in here and card games that I like to pull out every now and then, but it doesn't really have anything to do with this video, so we'll move on to the Batman section. Yes, that is right. Batman has his own entire section in here. Why, you ask? Well, look at how many books there are, first of all. So I figured he needed to kind of be distinct from the rest of the DC stuff. But what I've done with Batman is actually pretty kind of interesting, and at least I think. What I've done is sort of created my own timeline for Batman, starting from like his early years, and then each subsequent omnibus is meant to represent like him having more experience. There are some kind of exceptions to that rule, but here, I'll explain a little bit as we go on. So we have, first of all, Batman Year 1. It doesn't really get any earlier than that, does it? Because this is meant to be a modern sort of origin story for Batman by Frank Miller. Focuses on Batman's first year as Batman. A lot of inspiration for movies like Batman Begins came from this story, and The Batman as well with Robert Pattinson. Again, just focuses on a less experienced Batman, sort of learning, getting into. Well, he's not a rookie, but he's not the expert that we know him today. So that's his first year, and then we have the next story, Batman, The Man Who Laughs, Deluxe Edition, and this is sort of his very first encounter with the Joker, and I figured that would be a good spot to put after Year 1, because, you know, they tease the appearance of Joker a little bit in Year 1. And then we have Batman Gothic by Grant Morrison, and this is a very unique Batman tale, but I kind of wanted it to represent like Batman's very first encounter with like mystical stuff, the mystic side of his occupation. And then we have my favorite Batman omnibus containing my favorite Batman story, Batman by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, and then my favorite story being Batman: The Long Halloween. But this also collects Batman Haunted Night, which is a collection of 3 short stories by the same creators, and then the follow-up to Long Halloween, Batman Dark Victory, and the spin-off story, Catwoman When... Why is that so difficult for me to say? Catwoman When in Rome, which takes place during Dark Victory, I think, if I remember correctly. It's either during Long Halloween or during Dark Victory. Those 2 stories are so, like, cohesive that I kind of view them as one unit. But yeah, strongly recommend this as anybody's first like Batman omnibus. If you love the character in like shows or movies or video games or any stuff like that, totally recommend this omnibus. Batman by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, especially The Long Halloween, man. Like, it heavily inspired the Dark Knight movie. It's this murder mystery. It's still early Batman. It's like you could argue it's his like second year as Batman. He doesn't have any of his sidekicks or anything like that. His relationship with James Gordon is still sort of developing and evolving. A lot of good moments with Harvey Dent in here. It centers around Batman having to solve like the mystery behind this new villain known as Holiday, who's committing crimes on specific holidays. And it's not who you think it is. But each sort of a chapter of this book is like centered around or themed around a specific holiday and specific crime or villain. And it's just you will get through this book so quickly. I read this entire omnibus in like 2 days for the first time. And then following up from that, we have a whole bunch of deluxe editions. So we have Robin Year 1, which as it sounds is, kind of the first year of Robin, because in Dark Victory we get introduced to Robin, and I figured that was a good segue here. Then we have Batman Ego and Other Tales by Darwin Cook. This is super duper good. Batman Ego is a really interesting story, and elements from it were used in The Batman with Robert Pattinson as well, because it delves into the whole like Bruce Wayne versus Batman, the psychology of it, and how Batman is like this creature that Bruce has to create to accomplish his goal. But there's some good stories besides that in here too. That's why it's called Ego and Other Tales. Then we have Batgirl Year One. Really enjoyed this too. So this is sort of where Batgirl comes into the picture. Then we have Nightwing Year One. So Robin has moved on. He's shed the mantle of Robin and he's moved on to Nightwing. He's going solo, doing his own superhero thing. And then we have Batman the Killing Joke, one of the most well-known Batman stories. It's a little dark that I have that only 2 books after Batgirl Year One, but hey, that's how it worked out. At some point, I really should review The Killing Joke. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. But it basically centers around, well, a lot of people will be familiar with the story already, but it's like Joker sort of trying to cripple Batman and James Gordon psychologically, namely James Gordon, just to show Batman that all it takes is one bad day and somebody could become like the Joker. Another Joker could be born, so to speak. Then we have another iconic story here, Batman, A Death in the Family, dealing with a big event centered around Batman's second Robin, because after the first Robin left, Batman had to get a second Robin. And there were some interesting things that happened in here. I thought this would be like a super dark story, but then you read it and it's actually kind of campy and quirky, and I don't know if I really liked it that much overall. Like, it definitely has a lot of plot significance, but Death in the Family is a very weird story, and that whole bit with like Joker and like diplomatic immunity because he's become an ambassador to whatever country, it gets pretty ridiculous, but still an important point in Batman's lore. Next up, we have Batman Arkham Asylum. What a crazy mind trip of a book this is. Basically, it's viewed as, or I choose to view it as, Batman's nightmare. Like, you can view the whole thing as like a dream, and the art kind of supports that. Basically, Batman gets a call that that Arkham Asylum has been taken over by the inmates, and he has to go and kind of settle things, but it's not your typical like, oh, he jumps in there, beats everybody up, and saves the day type of story. It gets very psychological, very disturbing. This is why I think it's like a bad dream, because the way Batman acts in this story is not like the typical heroic way you might expect him to. Anyway, next up we have Batman Nightfall, probably the most iconic Batman story from the 90s. This is where we get the first appearance of Bane. Love Bane as a Batman villain. He's not done properly a lot of the time. A lot of the time people turn him into just like the big, dumb, muscly brute. But what I love about this story, or at least volume 1 of Nightfall, is that he's super smart. He's manipulative. He's very methodical in his approach to Batman. His goal is to like absolutely exhaust Batman physically and psychologically, and then when he's basically at his breaking point, finish him off. And hence the title Nightfall. And then really liked volume 1. Didn't really like volume 2 and 3 that much. I know there are omnibuses of this material, but these thick trades kind of have all the essentials you need. I feel like the omnibuses are just too bloated. The covers are particularly not very appealing in my opinion. So all I really felt like I needed was these thick trades. And that was sort of reinforced once I read through volumes 2 and 3. I wasn't really a big fan. Those kind of dragged on, but did really like volume 1. Next, we have the next big chapter in the 90s for Batman, which is No Man's Land. We have 3 omnis here, The Road to No Man's Land, and then No Man's Land volumes 1 and 2, centering around a big catastrophe that happens in Gotham that forces the city to be cordoned off and locked basically from the outside. Nobody's allowed in or out. Again, I haven't read it yet. I should, but we'll see. Just sort of the Bat family has to deal with the consequences of this sort of lawless land. And I know a lot of this was used to inspire Dark Knight Rises. There's a pretty big section of that movie where a similar situation happens, anarchy, so to speak. Then we have the Tower of Babel Deluxe Edition. Now, this was pretty important. The reason I put this here is it's kind of Batman's... It has some interactions with the Justice League. I figure they're kind of more like early interactions with the Justice League. It sort of deals with Batman's like trust issues and how he has always got a backup plan for everything. But I figured this was kind of an important spot to put this book. And then we have Batman Hush. Again, a really, really action blockbustery type story. Jeff Loeb on writing again, but artwork by Jim Lee. And holy crap, I maintain this is still some of Jim Lee's best work on Batman. There's so much beautiful artwork in here. Even more true in the Absolute Edition, which I also have. Does the story make the most logical sense? No, there's lots of plot holes and stuff, but honestly, if you're new to Batman comics, this is a pretty good place to start. It does a good job at introducing you to a whole bunch of villains and characters and stuff. Again, the art is beautiful. It's so easy to follow. Because of its breakneck pace, I don't think it'll be too difficult for people to read. And then up next, we have another big chapter in Batman's history, Under the Red Hood. So this is kind of a follow-up to A Death in the Family. But it deals with... This is one of my favorite Batman stories ever, and one of my favorite Batman animated movies ever. If you haven't seen it, totally go see it. It's amazing. And it adapts the story pretty well, and actually I think the movie does a little bit better job than the book. Anyway, a mysterious vigilante appears in Gotham who is, has kind of similar goals to Batman, but he's going about it the lethal way. And that doesn't really sit too well with Batman. So he's got to figure out who is this new vigilante calling himself the Red Hood, and where did he come from? What's he after? Why does he care so much about messing with Batman? That kind of thing. Really, really great story. It's fantastic. And then we have the Batman by Paul Dini omnibus. Paul Dini, if you don't know, was one of the main writers on the Batman animated series show. So it stands to reason that this omnibus kicks butt, and oh boy, does it. This is so good. Collects his Streets of Gotham series, but then also a lot of Hush follow-up stories. The Hush follow-up stories in here are even better than the original Batman Hush story, which is rare to say, but Paul Dini knocks it out of the park with this omnibus. And then we have what is probably one of the most confusing eras in Batman, the Batman by Grant Morrison era. Again, a lot of people actually put this as their favorite. I quite enjoyed these books too, but yeah, people aren't kidding. These books will definitely confuse you the first time you read through them. I've reviewed volumes 1 and 2. I haven't gotten around to reviewing volume 3 yet, but let me know if you'd be interested in that, because again, these books... There's a lot to talk about. It's encouraged to do a little bit of homework before you read these. I wouldn't say these are good starting points for reading Batman. Then we have Batman, Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader by Neil Gaiman. And this is a really interesting story. It's super duper short. It's a super small deluxe edition, but it's basically meant to be like... It's presented as the last Batman story ever told, but without spoiling things, it basically involves Batman trying to solve the mystery of his own death. Now, is that a real death? Is it more of a symbolic death? I don't know. You're going to have to read that to find out, but I strongly recommend it, and it gets about as trippy as you would expect a Neil Gaiman book to get. Then we have one of my favorite Batman stories I've read recently, which is Batman the Black Mirror. It recently got a deluxe edition, which came out, so I'm super excited to pick that up once I get a chance. Black Mirror is written by Scott Snyder, who eventually went on to do the New 52 series for Batman. and penciled by Jock, and there's some art by Francesco Francavilla as well. Super duper good. It kind of, well, Scott Snyder came from a horror background, horror writing, and he kind of carries that over into the Black Mirror as well. And the title is very, I guess, symbolic for what happens in here as well, because you don't have your typical Batman in here. It's somebody else under the cowl, but he's forced to go up against a force that's kind of like a dark reflection of who he is, and that's sort of where the title comes from. And then we have Batman Gates of Gotham, the deluxe edition by Scott Snyder, Kyle Higgins, and this is sort of a precursor to the New 52 series. It might be the very last, one of the last Batman stories that came out before the New 52, which is interesting because it sort of delves into this sort of unknown history of Gotham and the origins of Gotham, which, you know, these themes kind of carry through into the New 52 era of Batman and like the Court of Owls and everything. So Gates of Gotham is actually a really interesting like prelude to that. I definitely enjoyed it from what I can remember. And then we have finally the Batman New 52 series, the two omnibuses, volumes 1 and 2 by Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. A lot of people really like this as their favorite Batman series. I don't know if I would say it was my favorite. I definitely liked volume 1 more than volume 2. Volume 1 is super strong because you have Court of Owls, which is my favorite story from this era. Super fascinating. This sort of secret society that's lived in Gotham all this time. It's almost like Gotham's Illuminati. And Batman's so arrogant. He's like, no, if they can't exist, otherwise I would have noticed. I would have discovered them by now. And, well, he pays the price for his arrogance, shall we say. But then you have Death of the Family, which is really, really good. Not Death in the Family, Death of the Family, because comic titles love to confuse you. And then you have 0 Year in Volume 1 as well, which I thought was all right. Probably the weakest story in that book. But then Volume 2, I was less keen on. I know it definitely has its fans. And you have stories like, what was it, Batman The End? In the End? No, Batman The End, I think. Anyway, another Joker story in here, which I thought was really strong. But then the book kind of declines after that a little bit. Because you have this arc called Super Heavy, which I wasn't that invested in. Again, it changes, it offers a new perspective on Batman and a different character under the cowl. And there's definitely a really cool new supervillain in there, Mr. Bloom. But I wasn't super keen on that story. But then you do have Last Night on Earth in Volume 2 as well. And that was a pretty interesting, like, Elseworlds type story, which I enjoyed. So Volume 2 is just kind of all right, but I definitely liked Volume 1 more. I haven't read Batman Eternal yet, one of my more recent pickups, but it's also written... Is it written by Scott Snyder? I think so. And James Tynion? I can't remember. But yeah, it's kind of... it was coming out around the New 52 time, so that's why I have it there. Then we have Dark Knight's Metal, the whole Dark Knight, dark multiverse thing that was going on. I wasn't originally planning on picking it up, but I figured I'd give it a shot because it was on the cheaper side. We have Batman and Robin by Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason, a run that's quite heavily praised. So I figured I would check it out. Kind of coincides with a lot of the stuff that was happening in the Grant Morrison omnibuses, namely Volume 3. So I'm already prepared. I've done the required reading. I just have to crack this book open at some point. And then we have some like Bat Family books. So we have, again, timeline kind of falls apart a little bit with DC because of all the reboots they do all the time. So this is where I had to put these books. But we have Batgirl by Gail Simone. Batgirl Returns, rather. That's the name of this omnibus. And holy crap, did I love this book. So freaking good. Loved the art. Loved seeing Barbara Gordon in the Batgirl costume again after she was Oracle for so many years due to the repercussions, the consequences of the Killing Joke story. But yeah, loved the sort of darker approach to Batgirl. I loved seeing her kind of get more familiar, having to learn the ropes again, being back in the costume after a while, kind of facing her demons, coming out the other side. Such good writing by Gail Simone. Really loved it. I haven't picked up Batgirl of Burnside, and I don't know if I will. I'm not super drawn in by the direction they chose to take with that follow-up series. But anyway, moving on, we have Nightwing, the Prince of Gotham Omnibus. So this is Nightwing's New 52 series, the first half of it anyway. I thought this was okay. It wasn't my favorite. It has some interesting stuff in there. Nightwing's an interesting character because he's very quippy. He's like the Spider-Man-esque character of the Bat family. They do some interesting stuff with him. They sort of explore his backstory and origins coming from the circus and how the Court of Owls might be involved in that. And there's a section where he goes to another city for a bit. But overall, I don't think the book does really like too many interesting things or to the character, or has him do many. I don't know, it doesn't develop him that much compared to like how much development Batgirl got in the Batgirl Returns omnibus. And then we have Batwoman omnibus by J.H. Williams III, Hayden Blackman, Greg Rucka, a bunch of other people. This book was good, I'd say. The art is definitely the standout here. Freaking beautiful art in here. But there's some really interesting stories in here too. Batwoman Elegy, which is one of the earlier arcs you get in here, is probably the highlight. It's definitely really well done. The art style does this really interesting thing of like switching, using a more traditional style when Kate Kane is on the panel, and then switching to like a more dynamic and bombastic style of paneling when Batwoman's in the picture. Overall, pretty decent. Introduces a lot of like supernatural elements, a lot of supernatural adversaries in here. And then one of the earliest books I picked up for Batman, The Rise and Fall of the Batman omnibus. But this is kind of like so recent that every time I pick up a different Batman book, it just sort of gets priority because it's, you know, I like to go in order, in chronological order as much as possible. Although sometimes I do jump around. So this book always just gets pushed farther and farther back. But I have heard that this is a really, really solid book and a really good Bat family book. So I am looking forward to reading it when I get to it. Whenever that will be, I don't really know. But moving on to this next section, we have this sort of alternate universe Batman stuff and just other miscellaneous Batman titles. But starting off with the legendary Dark Knight Returns, probably to a lot of people, Frank Miller's magnum opus with a work on Batman. Sort of a far future look at Batman, very dystopian world. Batman's been out of the game for a long time, but he's forced to kind of pick up the cowl again and jump back into action. Very, very dark. Very influential at the time. A lot of people view it as like the best Batman story ever. In my opinion, I don't think it is. It is really good, but I don't know, there's other stories I enjoy more. And then we have the Batman Adventures Omnibus, which I'm excited for. I don't know when I'm going to get to it. I know people have asked me to read this, but I don't know, I just haven't really been in the mood for, I guess, those types of stories right now, but I'll try to get to it hopefully sooner rather than later. I just can't like promise anything right now, but it's based on the Batman animated series, the animated show, which again, I love. What a just definitive depiction of Batman. So I'll probably enjoy it once I get to it, but once the time is right. And then we have some sort of spin-off, I guess, titles also centered in the Batman animated series universe, because we have the Batman Adventures Mad Love Deluxe Edition and the Harley and Ivy Deluxe Edition. Those I got before the Omnibus came out for Batman Adventures, and I think Mad Love is included in the Batman Adventures Omnibus, if I remember correctly. But Harley and Ivy does have some bonus material that isn't in there. Anyway, we have Batman Year 2, the deluxe edition. Shout out to Omar from Near Mint Condition, his favorite Batman story, or one of his favorite. I don't know. No judgment, right? But I decided to pick it up because I was curious to see what all the hubbub was about, and it's it's definitely funny, not in the traditional comedic sense, but it introduces some interesting ideas, like Batman with a gun, for example. But I don't know, it's not really canon anymore, so it's kind of funny to look back on it in hindsight now. We have Batman Noel, which is a really fascinating sort of take on Batman, kind of like depicting a version of A Christmas Carol, but instead of Ebenezer Scrooge, you have Batman, and it's sort of a critique on the modern hyper-violent depiction of Batman. But I've already done a review on that, so I won't go too in depth there. Harleen, oh man, I just finished reading this. Holy crap, this was a good book. Short but sweet. Really delves into the psychology of Harley Quinn, expands on her origin in a more realistic way. Stjepan Šejić does the art and the writing, and the art in here too is freaking really, really good. There's a lot of like symbolism and metaphors even in the art that are done really well. I'll try to put out a review of it soon. Then we have Deceased, the first, one of the first, like, I guess, volumes of it. I checked this out as it was a gift, so I'm not really into the whole like zombie thing, but it's basically a zombie virus starts taking over the DC universe because of a thing that happens. So it's kind of like a zombie story, but with superhero characters. And I don't know, I thought it was all right. I couldn't really latch onto it that well. But again, I kind of struggle with the whole like zombie thing anyway. Okay, and that does it for the Batman section. So now we have the rest of the DC section, and this is probably going to have a lot of my still to be reads in here. Oh, wait a minute. Why is Batman White Knight there? Huh. Let's fix that. That's in the wrong spot. Yeah, we had Batman White Knight, the deluxe edition. This is kind of an interesting story. It's an Elseworlds tale, and it kind of centers around what if the Joker went sane? And it kind of paints Batman as a villain in this story. So it's an interesting kind of like role reversal here in this story. But definitely some good artwork, definitely some intriguing plot elements in here. If I were to review it, I would have to revisit the story though, since it has been a while since I read it. Okay, now we can jump into the rest of the DC section. Starting off with the Aquaman by Jeff Johns Omnibus. Wow. Aquaman, not really that... like, he doesn't draw me in that much as a character. But holy crap, man, Jeff Johns knew how to fix that. He took Aquaman and he made him freaking cool. He made him into an action hero in this series. This is Aquaman's New 52 series, and that's exactly its goal. This book's goal is to convince you that no, Aquaman can be cool. Shut up. But yeah, so many good stories in here, like involving this these mysterious creatures known as the Trench, I think they're called. Aquaman and Mera get some more development here. This is early Aquaman, like it's New 52, so it's a bit of a reboot, but he's still sort of young. He's kind of struggling with his duality between like humanity and Atlantean. It's like he's kind of caught in the middle between these two. He doesn't really feel like he fully belongs to one or the other. So again, really, really good stories in here, but some fantastic art as well. Definitely recommend checking out the book just for that, even. And then we have Catwoman here of East End Omnibus by Ed Brubaker, once again showing up, and Darwin Cook as well. Man, I really should get to this book. The art looks amazing. I love Ed Brubaker's work that I've read. Just haven't had the time to get around to it, as with many of these other books on this shelf here. I have read Crisis on Infinite Earths, though. Did a review recently on that. Hugely influential story, but I struggled with it a lot. I don't know if it still holds up today. It was a tricky one for me to get through. But I have this book in the C section alphabetically because it's kind of in the Crisis section. Because next we have Infinite Crisis, and a lot of people say that omnibus is really, really good. And that's the main reason I read Crisis on Infinite Earths, is so I could get kind of some backstory before jumping into Infinite Crisis, because people generally say you need to have read Crisis on Infinite Earths before you jump to that. Then we have sort of the follow-up years from Infinite Crisis, which is 52. The 52 Omnibus, featuring a whole bunch of creators. Jeff Johns, Grant Morrison, Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, Keith Giffen, I think Gail Simone as well, probably. And then Final Crisis, which is ironic because it was not the final crisis. There have been more crises since then, but I guess DC's gonna DC. Probably the biggest omnibus physically that I own, just in terms of sheer thickness. Like, Immortal Hulk might be the highest in page count, but this is just huge. This is Grant Morrison's, well, brainchild, basically. Crazy. People say they struggle to get through this book because it's so convoluted. We'll see how I fare. I mean, I've read his Grant Morrison. I've read his Batman run. So we'll see whenever I get to Final Crisis. I'll have to do like a Crisis read through at some point and go through like each of the Crisis Omnis in order. So I've got a couple others to get through before I reach Final Crisis. Then we have Deathstroke by Christopher Priest Omnibus. Not high up on my reading list, but people generally say it's a really, really good run. It's from the 2016 era, the Rebirth era of DC. Again, Christopher Priest also wrote that Black Panther omnibus that I showed off earlier. And again, people say this is a really interesting exploration into Deathstroke, who is, he's a villain. People like to call him an anti-hero, but no, he's a villain. He's kind of a horrible person. So it'll be interesting to have a book centered around a character like that as your protagonist. We have The Flash by Jeff Johns. Now, I was curious about this because a lot of people say this is Flash's best run. Big fan of Jeff Johns' work. I got through Volume 1, and it was a little bit of a struggle. Ironically, it was kind of slow, but I think I struggled most with the art because a lot of it was just either overly exaggerated or the art style switches at one point and just becomes very, monotone. There's, basically only one color used throughout, just shades of blue. A lot of the art looks very flat and plain in Volume 1. I hope that improves in Volume 2, and especially Volume 3, which is the New 52 stuff, I think. Or no, it's the Flashpoint stuff. Yeah, that's what it is. So we'll see. Don't know how eager I am to get back to The Flash, but hey, if I'm wrong, let me know if I should go back and review that. Then we have Gotham Central, which, so good. Ed Brubaker, Greg Rucka, Michael Lark, Stefano Gaudiano, Cano, I don't know how to pronounce that. Super interesting, very grounded depiction of the Gotham Police Department. So they're your protagonist. It's kind of like a cop drama. It's not really a superhero book. It's more so a story about the police department and what their struggles are about and how they deal with all these supervillains in this city that's, full of them, and they, how they feel about relying on superheroes for help and how that all works. Again, very grounded, gritty, crime noir, detective, thrillery type story, and I really, really loved it. It's got some really compelling stuff in there. Definitely recommend that omnibus. One of my favorite books from, was it 2022, I think? Yeah, Harley Quinn and the Gotham City Sirens. I put it in the G section because really it should just be Gotham City Sirens. They just put Harley Quinn's name there for sales purposes. But yeah, Paul Dini started off on this series, so immediately drawn by the name. Paul Dini as the writer. He eventually leaves the book and other creators take over. But this was a really, really interesting story because you have these three characters, Catwoman, Poison Ivy, Harley Quinn, who are each coming from their own respective struggles. Catwoman has just overcome the whole like Hush saga and everything that went on there. Harley Quinn has decided to leave the Joker. She's on her own. Poison Ivy is kind of just doing her own thing. But they all come together and kind of form this bond, this team called the Gotham City Sirens, and they're living together in Gotham and trying to turn over a bit of a new leaf, try to work together. You know, because it explores like a more human side of Poison Ivy and explores Harley Quinn's, you know, new, like what her life looks like now that she's gone from the Joker. Yeah, and it's got this like a Charlie's Angels vibe to it, so it was really interesting. We have some big boys next. Green Lantern by Jeff Johns. I need to get around to reading this because everybody says this is like a must-own set of omnibuses from DC. Some say it's Jeff Johns' best work. He really like revitalized the character of Green Lantern, and Hal Jordan really made him into a superstar, so to speak. So I have to see if that's actually true. I haven't gotten around to reading any of these, but have to do it at some point. Let me know if I should put that higher on my reading list. Next up, we have the Harley Quinn omnibuses, volumes 1 and 2, from the New 52 era. Man, I really, really enjoyed Volume 1. In a lot of ways, Harley Quinn Volume 1 gave me the enjoyment I was expecting from Deadpool by Joe Kelly, but then I didn't get in that book. This book provided a lot of that, a lot of good comedy and humor, even some fourth wall breaking, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. Some it's really lighthearted and silly stories. And some really good art, too. So I think this book worked really well. I haven't gotten around to reading Volume 2 yet, but I definitely should. And then we have the Injustice books. Man, for books based on a video game, of all things, this was way better than it had any right to be. So good, especially Volume 1. Volume 1 is super strong. It basically centers around the idea of, well, it's an alternate universe. It's like a what-if story. But it's about what would happen if Superman was pushed too far and became evil. And what an interesting concept, like right off the bat. I know DC has kind of gone a little bit overboard with that in recent years, constantly obsessed with an evil Superman rather than the classic hopeful Superman. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed Volume 1, especially steamrolled through the book. Volume 2 is all right as well. Like, it's serviceable, but definitely Volume 1 is the stronger point. All right, next we have JLA. J for Justice League. JLA by Grant Morrison Omnibus. This one I got because, well, this whole JLA era really reminded me of the Justice League animated show and Justice League Unlimited. So when I look at this series, that's kind of what I'm reminded of. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of the most well-known and popular Justice League stories come from here, from this era. So I'm definitely looking forward to trying it out. I also have the New 52 Justice League omnibuses, both volumes. Volume 1, definitely looking forward to it, but again, I would have to read JLA first. I like doing things in order, that's just how I am. But Volume 1, I'm definitely looking forward to because you have like artwork by Jim Lee, which I'm really, I'm a sucker for Jim Lee, man. Like, the man can draw. And then we have the Question omnibuses. Again, I really should get around to these. This sort of street level crime investigation stories from the 80s, martial arts stuff. I don't know. I'm really into it, intrigued, but I just, again, need to find the damn time for all this stuff. And then we have the Sleeper Omnibus. So this is a little interesting. Again, Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips. They've worked together on several series, but this this is kind of outside of Marvel and DC. Well, I know it's labeled as DC, but I was intrigued because, again, I like Ed Brubaker. I was curious about this book. It's sort of like, from what I understand, it centers around this sleeper agent who goes undercover, but then he mysteriously loses contact with his handlers, and then has to find a way to like navigate this world from that point onwards. Maybe I'm completely butchering it. Again, I haven't read the story. I'm not that familiar with it. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But it just sounds like an interesting premise, you know? And it's got that sort of gritty vibe that always draws me in. Then we have some Superman books. Superman Birthright by Mark Waid. Death of Superman. Again, super iconic story that I should read. Didn't really feel like going for the full package with the Omnibus. I figured just reading the Death of Superman story is probably enough. All-Star Superman I have read, though, by Grant Morrison, and that I really, really enjoyed. Really understands Superman very well. It's kind of a, well, yeah, I'd say it's an Elseworlds story, like a what-if story, but basically Superman discovers that he's dying, and it's all about what is he going to do with the time he has left. This sort of all-powerful being that everybody looks up to. What's he going to do when he knows his time is up? Then we have Watchmen. I don't know what I can possibly say about this book that hasn't been said already or analyzed in depth by countless people. That's why I haven't really done a review on it, but always listed as like one of the best and most influential graphic novels of all time. Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons. Yeah, very atypical presentation of a quote-unquote superhero story. Very political. Definitely enjoyed it. It's a bit of a slow burn, but it's definitely got some interesting messaging in there. But again, I don't even know if I should review it because, like I said, what could I possibly say that hasn't been said about that book? And then we have Wonder Woman Earth 1 by Grant Morrison, Yannick Paquette. This one I enjoyed. It's an alternate universe depiction of Wonder Woman. It's like a modern take on the Golden Age Wonder Woman. So I wouldn't say you have to have read Golden Age Wonder Woman to understand this, but it would probably help. And there's some interesting interviews out there with Grant Morrison talking about how they, some of the ideas they had for this series and some of the thoughts and inspiration behind it, and how they really understood the original creator's vision for Wonder Woman and how they were sort of inspired by them. All right, moving on up here. I promise we're almost done, guys. If you stuck around the whole time, if you're still here, go comment Excelsior or something in the chat, and then I'll know you stuck around. But here we have the Absolute section. So my logic with Absolute editions is I'll only get them if the story itself means a lot to me, or I want to have like a particular story in like oversized artwork, like huge, like the presentation is really important for me. So naturally, that is why Absolute The Long Halloween is here, because that is just my favorite Batman story. Had to have it in an Absolute edition, just to really appreciate that Tim Sale artwork and especially some of the just crazy spread pages in here. Absolute Killing Joke as well. Again, super big story. Not my favorite, but I think it deserves the Absolute format just because of the significance it has. Absolute Hush. I mean, Jim Lee artwork in Absolute format. Come on, how could you say no? Absolute Batman Court of Owls. Again, my favorite story from the Batman New 52. Really, the Absolute format really helps Greg Capullo's artwork shine, because the Omnibus volume 1 Batman New 52 Omnibus suffers from a lot of gutter loss, I hate to say. So this Absolute edition really helps alleviate that. And then we have an interesting one. This isn't an Absolute edition. This is a gift I got from some friends. Batman, the Definitive History of the Dark Knight in Comics, Film, and Beyond. This is super cool. It's like a textbook encyclopedia style book, but as it says, it just goes into the history of Batman, whether it's the comics or the video games or the movies, the shows. there's so much good information in here, and like a lot of fun like props and stuff they include, and photographs. Just from a historical perspective, it's just so cool to look at, you know? And then we have 4 volumes of Spawn, the Origins collection. Image calls these deluxe editions, but really they're the same as absolute editions. They got the fancy slipcase and everything. So I know there's more volumes of this, but 4 volumes of this is really more than enough for me. I'm not really in Spawn for like the quality of the writing or anything. It's more for just the artwork, let's be honest, by Todd McFarlane and Greg Capullo. Gotta have the oversized absolute format for that. But, you know, I really, really like Todd McFarlane's work and the stuff he's done as a creator, whether it's his work on Spider-Man or a Spawn, or like the stuff he's done for like McFarlane Toys and all this other stuff. It's just a really cool story. Anyway, we have here an art book. Interesting how that snuck in there, from one of my favorite video game series, because again, I'm a pretty big gamer. You can ask me anything about that if you want. This is The Art of Deus Ex. This game is so cool. It's super political. It's about like it's set in the near future where humanity has started to go through like cybernetic augmentations, and it delves into all these themes about like transhumanism and what it means to be human, and what is it that makes us human if we keep like replacing like parts of our body with other stuff. And there's people who are for it and people who are against it, and it delves into like racism and segregation and all these themes. Really, really interesting story. I wish they would make another game in this franchise. I'm holding out hope. Here we have a fun little board game centered around Batman the Animated Series that some friends got me as well. Really, it's still unopened, but we definitely need to find some time to play that at some point. Next up, we have just the trade paperback and miscellaneous section here. So we have first all of the, well, not all, but all of my Ultimate Spider-Man trades that I originally read, starting with the Ultimate collections, and then eventually I had to switch to the regular trade paperbacks because, Marvel just stopped publishing Ultimate collections. Shake my fist at them. This is super cool. The Spider-Man Encyclopedia. This is one of the earliest books I picked up. I got this as a kid from like a book fair. Because it had all these like cool Spider-Man characters in there, and I wanted to learn about them. This is actually where I technically read my first comic, because at the very back here is a reprint of Amazing Spider-Man 252 with the black suit and everything. So that's, man, a super memorable issue for me. Then we have the trade paperback of Spider-Man Spider's Shadow by Chip Zdarsky, also included in the Chip Zdarsky Spider-Man Omnibus. But this is where I read the story for the first time. I don't usually read in trade paperback, but for this story, I was just really like excited by the premise, and I wanted to check it out. Kraven's Last Hunt, obviously probably Spider-Man's, one of his most well-known stories, and a lot of people say is his darkest story. So just, again, had to check it out for the significance. I thought it was pretty good. We have Spider-Man Noir, the complete collection. I've done a review on that. It centers around an alternate universe Spider-Man. It's set in the 30s during the sort of Great Depression era. And yeah, it's got that sort of mobster feel, gangster feel, old school, noir-esque as the name implies. It gets pretty dark. It reimagines the stories around certain characters, and yeah, overall I enjoyed it. Then we have World War Hulk here, which I still need to read. I didn't really feel like springing for the omnibus because I don't really feel like I need all the tie-ins for that event. I think the main story is just fine. I just need to read this at some point. We got Dark Web here, which was a gift from a friend. I don't know, it doesn't have the best reviews. I'll probably get around to reading it at some point, but yeah, we'll see about that one when I have the time. We got a couple of Deadpool mangas, which I got from a friend as well. Really interesting take on Deadpool. I actually really enjoyed these books. Very heavy focus on like the over-the-top fourth wall breaking humor. Definitely more focused on like the comedic side of Deadpool rather than the dramatic, introspective, depressed depiction of Deadpool. And then we have more miscellaneous books here, like a volume of All-Star Batman, which I haven't read yet. It was a gift, but it's volume 3, so it's a little bit of an awkward place to start. Yeah, some random like Assassin's Creed books that I've never read before. I think it just came with one of the games that I bought when I was a kid. The Death of the Family trade, which I read before I picked up the Batman Scott Snyder Omnibus Volume 1. The Batman Under the Red Hood trade, which has now been replaced by the deluxe edition I have. Some miscellaneous Spawn books that I also got as gifts. But again, now I have the big old absolute or deluxe editions of those, so these got moved to the miscellaneous section. The Witcher, definitely need to read this still. I'm a fan of that universe, and The Witcher 3 as well I enjoyed playing. So this is sort of like a collection of the first short stories from that universe. A book of Death Stranding that I got from a friend as well. I still haven't played Death Stranding. If anybody has, let me know how it is. I'm a little bit intimidated by the walking simulator nature of the gameplay, but who knows, maybe I'll give it a try at some point. How to Hide a Mistake at Work, another jokey gift I got from a friend. Well, it's just a lot of, silly scenarios and situations in there. And then we have this top shelf here, just a whole bunch of figures representative of, the collection. Like I got a bust of Spider-Man there, and a really cool article from a Time magazine going into the history of Spider-Man comics, movies, stuff like that. Some book repair tools like the brush and the glue, PVA glue. And then this really, really cool Batman statue I got as a gift as well, featuring McFarlane's Batman, basically, the way he would draw him. Super duper cool statue. Love this. Definitely happy about that. I like how he kind of blends into the darkness of the bookshelf too. It fits very well. But there we go, ladies and gentlemen. If you made it through the whole thing, you know which secret word to comment, and if you do, I'll give you a cookie. If you know, you know. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining me, guys. I know it was long, but this was actually a lot of fun to just sort of casually go through my collection and just sort of talk off the cuff about each book. If you saw anything in here you're interested in, that you'd like me to review, point it out, let me know down below, and I'll add it to the list for sure. Or if you have any questions about whether it's about a specific book or story, or just about like the hobby in general, if you have any questions about me or anything like that, just leave them below. Let's talk a bit. But thanks again for 1K subs, guys. Again, it's been a crazy journey, and I hope I'll be able to continue it for as long as I can. But thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to catch you in another video real soon, so you have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye-bye, guys.